Welcome, everybody. I'd like to first invite all of our panelists to come up and join me. So first things first, logistics-wise, beer, wine, and beverages are in the back, I think most importantly. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today. I think we've got a terrific topic and a terrific panel. My name is Karl Freimuth. I'm a partner at Livingstone. I co-head our U.S. Industrials practice. We spend a lot of time in the medtech space, and I think it's a timely topic in light of where we are in the economic cycle and some of the consolidation opportunities that have gone on over the course of the last 10 years. We're going to talk through risks in the industry. We're going to talk through growth and market opportunities, and then we'll conclude with a discussion about capital drivers into the medtech space, as well as what lies ahead for the industry. So with that, I'd like to go through introductions with our distinguished panel.
Yeah, so Hunter Craig, I'm a vice president at GTCR. I've been with the firm since '08. So I'm in the healthcare group. For those that don't know GTCR, we are a Chicago-based private equity firm founded in 1980. We're currently investing our 12th equity fund, which is about a $5.25 billion pool of capital. As I said, healthcare is about a third of what we do. We do a lot of services stuff, a lot of product stuff. I personally work with three products companies. A company called Resonetics, which does outsource manufacturing to MedTech. A company called Sotera Health, which does outsource lab services and sterilization to MedTech, and then a company called Amri, Albany Molecular, which does outsourced manufacturing and development for the pharma space. Look forward to being here.
Hi, Kevin Cordero with Stryker, Craniomaxillofacial. I'm the Director of Clinical Research and Market Intelligence. Stryker is a major medical device manufacturer. We have segments in the orthopedic implant space, specialty surgery, medical surgical capital equipment. I've been with the company for 10 years, and in my role, I work between marketing R&D groups and also the business development teams.
Chris Witham, Motion Dynamics. I'm the president of the company. Was started 26 years ago. I've been with the company 18, and the reason I'm up here is joined a private equity group a couple of years ago. So we focus about 85 to 90% of our revenue comes from medical devices.
So thank you guys all for being here. Greatly appreciate the time. And to begin the panel, we're going to discuss some of the industry consolidation that has gone on over the last decade in the medtech space, in particular at the OEM level, the contract manufacturing organization level, and then the influx of private equity investment behind these organizations. At the OEM level, there's been Abbott, St. Jude, Zimmer Biomet, J&J Synthes, Medtronic, Covidien, and recently bought a robotic surgery business called Mazer Robotics. Smith's Medical Division was recently announced that it's going on the block this week as a spin-out from the UK PLC Smiths Group. On the contract manufacturing side, we've had Medplast and Vian as a major consolidator in the space. Paragon was acquired by NN Corp. Cadence and Kohlberg, Resonetics, GTCR. So the first question is, in light of all of that consolidation and the capital deployment within the sector, what impact will that activity have throughout the medtech supply chain?
I'm happy to start. On the OEM side, I think as a private equity investor, a couple opportunities that pop up. We've often seen some FTC-related sort of divestitures, which creates kind of some interesting opportunities. A lot of GTCR's investment model is around, executive teams, so folks are popping free as a result of those deals, which is interesting for us. As someone who has, investments in the value chain, I think it's kind of opportunities and challenges, frankly. I mean, I think if you're a larger player, of scale, I think it's, an opportunity because often they're trying to consolidate, their collective supplier bases and shifting that business to the bigger guys. So hopefully that's, kind of where you sit. I think if you're on the longer tail and you're less specialized or qualified or whatever, I think it's I think creates a real challenge.
Yeah, I think there are pros and cons to scale, and as Stryker being a larger medical device company, we're diversified and decentralized in terms of our business units, that we have some, what our CEO would call smaller speedboats that are in the $100 million range, and some larger billion-dollar businesses, where our competitors, we're seeing consolidation. We've seen some actually be advantageous because they're becoming more centralized and less focused on their customer bases, where we're staying decentralized and able to target our markets and really focus on the customer.
It's really created an opportunity for us as what I would call a tier 2 or tier 3 supplier, because the end customer might view some of these roll-ups, they turn into competitors. And so they don't want to source any new programs with them. So it's created an opportunity for us to actually quote on more work than what we would have prior to. So it's worked out well for us.
So with that consolidation trend, it has also developed a number of new entrants or non-traditional diversified industrial entrants who are building out significant either medical device platforms or contract manufacturing organizations. Some of those organizations include Molex, NN Corporation, Interplex, Nordson. So in your opinion, are these non-traditional diversified industrial players who are trying to get into higher growth markets making material inroads in the medtech space?
I mean, I'm happy to start. I'd say absolutely. I mean, if you rewind the clock, 5 years or so, a lot of the businesses in the medtech supply chain, found home with private equity groups, and there was less obvious strategic acquirer of those businesses. But over the last few years, as Karl was saying, a lot of industrial guys have emerged and built real businesses and are super aggressive acquirers in the space. And I think they've kind of cross the bridge of getting comfortable with the medtech realm, and a lot of the core manufacturing capabilities that these companies have are very similar to their industrial sides of the house. And the medical business has better, more stable growth, better margins, better returns on capital. And so they find themselves starting small and realizing that relative to the rest of their business, they can kind of play the same playbook in terms of kind of core capabilities, core competencies, and be indexed to the medtech space. So I think they're real. I think they're here to stay. I think it makes someone like sitting in my chair, it's a lot more challenging. If you're on the buy side trying to make investments, if you got a business to sell, they're a terrific buyer.
Yeah, it's again from a component standpoint, they end up being customers of ours, so it doesn't change our outlook a whole lot. But we can sure see it from a customer standpoint that they're extremely aggressive in what they're doing and doing a good job, very good job.
So Kevin, from your seat working at Stryker, doing a lot of the technical diligence on prospective acquisitions and watching all this consolidation happen, with some of Stryker's peers, how has that consolidation impacted Stryker's competitive position in the market?
So it hasn't affected us much at all. So there's obviously hospitals are looking to deal with larger vendors that have a broad platform of products, and fortunately we're in a position where we do have that capability to work cross-divisionally within the company to execute deals with customers based on implants and capital equipment and so forth. I mentioned before that we've seen a lot of our direct competitors in the CMF world be acquired or acquire other groups and lose a little bit of focus on their business. So it's actually been beneficial that we're still running our offense in a sense, as opposed to trying to keep up with other trends or get into spaces that may not be our direct core competency.
So speaking of running offense, from an acquisition perspective, in light of all this activity, has that changed Stryker's acquisition strategy in terms of looking to fill, product portfolio gaps, adding different technologies, being able to better service the hospitals, ultimately the patients?
So it may, and the customer obviously drives our gaps and where our needs are. So we want to stay in our spaces, within our specialized call patterns. We don't want to distract our sales force and take them out of their typical routine where we're now getting into newer technologies that are outside of scope of where their core competencies are, and also want to stick to where our strengths are. And if it's an acquisition that is directly within our spaces that complements our bag, then that's something that makes sense.
So Chris, kind of moving down the supply chain to the CMO perspective, in light of all this consolidation that has happened, are your OEM customers putting and placing more demands from an engineering support, from a on-time delivery from a quality perspective? Just talk about that in terms of that incremental demand on your business.
The three items you brought up are about the three things that have really changed, I would say, over the past 5 years for us. If you look at it from a financial standpoint, some of these mergers are really, we talked a little bit earlier, but the biggest struggle that we see is a push out of terms, of payment terms. A typical for us 2 years ago was 30 days. A lot of the big guys, it's just not an option. You're going to accept 90 days. So that becomes one issue. Say 3, 4, 5 years ago, 5 years ago, we probably did our first validation. And if you're familiar with automotive at all, very similar to a PPAP. It's validating a part. And this year, I think we've done 34 validations relative to our first one 5 years ago. So, and that all gets down to quality. It's really a verification of the quality of product that you're going to provide to your customer. And so that's created a ton of work for us to validate, because each customer has a unique requirement for validation. And then on-time delivery, that's probably been our number one focus this year. Again, I compare things to automotive where the expectation is on time, every single delivery. For us, a few years ago, there was a lot more flexibility in deliveries, and we didn't get held as much accountable if we missed, and that has really changed. I mean, we've made significant improvements in our business model because of that to drive, we're north of 98% now, where we used to play in the 60% range, and that's just not acceptable anymore. So those are the three things that really have driven our business.
And then as you look to the next chapter of growth for Motion Dynamics, when you look at kind of prototyping and additional platforms that you're focused on, I mean, how important is Motion's position to be on the front end of those platforms such that you can't be displaced?
Yeah. That is literally our business model. What you're talking about right there is we're very heavily weighted around the engineering experience. Our head of sales is engineering. I'm engineering. Obviously, head of our engineering, we've got a very high concentration of engineers. And our whole model is built on speed and being able to do things that other people can't do, and having, I'm going to call it old-fashioned relationships with R&D engineers. And the model is all about speed. It's being able to get iterations to engineers very quickly so they can do 1 or 2 or 3 iterations of their design versus just one. So that is truly how we grow, because once you get on a assembly and it goes through the validation process, goes through the FDA, unless you really make a big mistake, you're on there for the life of program, and that's how we grow.
So maybe a follow-up for Hunter and Chris. Maybe talk about some of the opportunities with the next tier of OEM medical device customers. So an Arthro Service, a Pega Medical, the groups that are developing to be maybe potential acquisition targets for the Strykers of the world, but also obviously kind of key potential customers for your platforms.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the small, mid-size guys on both MedTech side and, the pharma side often are, excellent at the R&D, side of the house and, focused on building up sales and marketing capabilities and, don't view the manufacturing stuff, quite as much as a core capabilities. So I think we're able to be, an efficient partner for them. They're kind of, virtual MedTech, virtual pharma companies. And we can help bring their products to market or through clinical development, that much more quickly. And often, for regulatory reasons, you end up being the sole supplier of their componentry, which is a nice place to be. And they get a bunch of traction, and they may be acquired by Stryker, but again, for regulatory reasons and otherwise, you're kind of spec'd in, which is a nice place to be.
Yeah, I guess I'd echo that a lot. I think where the opportunity is at, my opinion, and I'm into the manufacturing of component parts, but really, if you're going to try to grow a business, it's to acquire other companies that play in the same space versus going vertical, is to broaden your capabilities from a processing standpoint. I think that's where the opportunity is at.
I'd say just one other thing, too, as we think about opportunities as it sits today. I mean, I think a greater number of folks have kind of spun out from some of the big MedTech OEMs and have started, their own companies, and the capital on the VC side or the, public equity markets flowing to support those, companies is as robust today as it's probably ever been. So there's just a huge proliferation of, small, mid-size MedTech companies that, could be potential partners for guys like us.
So Hunter, maybe touch on that a bit further with your investment in Resonetics and how, GTCR has clearly identified, an opportunity to deploy capital in a high growth space and, take advantage of some of this consolidation activity.
Yeah, I mean, just as a quick background on Resonetics. So, this is a company that has very simply, a bunch of laser workstations, and they are, kind of micro machining, tight tolerance componentry for interventional medical products. So stuff that's going into the brain or into the heart or whatever. And there's these guys would know it better than I would, but kind of a steady shift from, more interventional to more interventional sorts of procedures and products from the super invasive stuff. So there's kind of a little bit of a secular tailwind toward these sorts of products. Continued kind of miniaturization of devices as well, which is another kind of additive tailwind for a business like Resonetics. And then, the landscape of outsourced developers, outsourced manufacturers to the MedTech world is astonishing. I mean, it's probably one of the most fragmented areas I think, we've come across. We work with a bunch of Abbott folks because they're here locally. Actually, 3 of our CEOs are Abbott guys, and they, kind of anecdotally say that Abbott works with, 200 or 300 CMO companies, across their supply chain, which is kind of hard to fathom. So you got the organic growth tailwinds, and you have a, robust follow-on acquisition opportunity where you're buying in kind of point solution folks, putting it on the platform, and being able to provide a broader set of services to the big OEMs, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what they're trying to solve for here, I think, over the next several years, is simplifying their supply chain and working with, broader, more global providers. So.
Great. So let's now shift gears to really talk through, risk from each of your seats, right? So, as the MedTech industry continues to grow at a rapid pace, and you have aging demographics, you have international competition, you have, rapid technological development from a device and a component perspective. That obviously introduces opportunity, but there's also risk in managing your respective businesses or investments. So, from your respective seats, how do you think through, kind of key risks as you're, either managing your business or your investments?
I'll start with that one. The things that keep me up at night, lack of skilled people available, number one. It's great the economy is doing so well, but I'll tell you what, the paradigm of everybody has to go to college to be a success is wrong, in my opinion. I I would highly recommend if somebody is, don't go to college if that's not where your heart is at. Learn a skilled trade. You will have a job forever. I truly believe that. So it's tough. We do very unique things. We don't have other competitors in the area that we can draw talent from. So we have to train every single person that walks in the door. And you'd be amazed that I literally had a conversation with a gentleman last week who's running a robotics program, and he talked about a kid who joined the program, and he's 16 years old, and he had never had a screwdriver in his hand before. That is a problem. That's a true story. So that's where we struggle, is to find people that have a mechanical aptitude to be able to do what we need to have done. So that from a day-to-day business standpoint, and when we're fortunate that we're growing year over year, and I think we've added 40 people this year, and so to add 40 people, to find 40 people that can do what you need them to do is difficult. Then the other thing that I looked at is, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is if cash is not readily available, our customers are driving extended terms, and so that's an issue that you need to pay attention to from a cash flow standpoint. So those are the two things.
Something going on right now is just regulatory headwinds. So drastic changes in policy, or the ability to get products to market based on just uncertainty or just variation, like we're seeing in Europe, that are requiring additional verifications and validations and changing our product development process. So that's a risk that's inherently out there in the medical device world, but is one that's you have to stay ahead of.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, I think the regulatory environment's only intensifying, and that's something certainly at the board level we're talking about a bunch. Bring on incremental quality folks across the organization, working with third parties a bunch. The regs and rules are constantly changing by geography, and so that's probably 1A, frankly, on the board's mind these days. Legal stuff. Customer product concentration stuff, we're kind of always trying to, manage over time, and, making sure we're not getting too beholden to any one guy. I would say that's the stuff we think about most.
Maybe a follow-up to Chris and Hunter, and kind of appropriate for our venue here at MHub, but, additive manufacturing, tends to be a hot topic in the advanced manufacturing circles versus kind of traditional subtractive manufacturing. So how do you view that as a risk, and I guess similarly an opportunity to your business?
With the type of process capabilities that we have, it's on my radar, but quite honestly, I don't view it as a risk. As far as 3D printing or that type of thing. It's actually a benefit for us from a tooling standpoint to be able to be faster and again, it all gets down to customer satisfaction, and customer satisfaction for us is driven by speed. We can drive speed by some of the later technologies out there where I can make a tool, I can make a fixture on a printer versus going through our tool room. So it's actually a benefit for us, and I don't see it as a risk in the products that we make.
At the device level, it is a very big focus and a big opportunity right now. The customer is looking for personalized medicine, patient-specific types of implants that we create now, but newer processes can allow for newer innovation as well.
Yeah, I'd echo all that. I mean, I think the 3D printing thing has been talked about a lot. It's every quarter talked about more. I think there's going to be applications for where it's super well suited, and then there's just certain areas that it really won't make inroads, but it's out there.
Great. So let's kind of move more up tempo and talk through market and growth opportunities, which in our opinion, on the sell side M&A perspective, is a material driver of valuations premium in this medtech sector. So let's start with one technology that's pretty pervasive with robotic surgery, right? This is a market that's, growing 20% annually over the next 5 years. You have Intuitive Surgical is, the dominant player. You've got, Verb Surgical, the joint venture of Google and J&J that's trying to get in the business. Stryker has made inroads with some acquisitions, as has Medtronic recently acquiring, Maison Robotics. So, given that investment and the prospective growth in robotic surgery, how do you guys view that as an opportunity in your businesses?
I'm happy to go. I mean, honestly, on the private equity side, speaking for GTCR, the super high tech, heavy capital investment sort of, or capital equipment sorts of businesses, we focus a little bit less on, just because they tend to be a little bit more cyclical and a little bit more lumpy. So I think we try and find maybe, componentry suppliers to those guys, which can be interesting. But the, being on the OEM side of the equation, we leave to folks like Stryker.
The robotics, Intuitive Surgicals of the world work really well for us because not so much that we supply components for the actual robot, but what we do is the tools that go on the robot for the procedure tend to be disposable. And we love disposable devices because they get used once and tossed. And so it creates a nice market for us that we probably don't have with today's procedures. So it ends up being a real growth market for us, and that's one of our bigger growth areas in our company is the robotic market.
Yeah, it's a tremendous opportunity, and hospitals want to be on the cutting edge and market their ability to deliver those types of services. So, larger companies that have both the capital and implant side of things are in a great position to take advantage of that.
And Kevin, maybe touch on the Mako investment that Stryker made.
So that was not my division. It was the orthopedic joint replacement division, but it was the first to market to do total knee replacements. So its focus is in the hip and knee reconstruction market.
So how do you guys view, kind of the next big thing from a technology perspective in MedTech? I mean, some of the key focus areas being, pain management, biologics, tissue regeneration. What's kind of the next big thing out there in your opinion?
I'll go. For us, it's twofold. I would say three: aneurysm repair, stroke treatment, and pain management. Pain management is probably the largest potential market that we see as a growth market.
I'd agree. Every year, the Cleveland Clinic releases their, fall list of, where the med device industry needs to go, or med tech industry, and pain management with the opioid crisis right now was a top one on their list. On the pharmaceutical side, nanotech and drug delivery, immunotherapy are hot topics right now. And then on the device side, the robotics and artificial intelligence, some of that aspect, as well as patient-specific virtual surgical planning, things like that, are cutting edge right now.
I got nothing to add. That's the list. Good rundown.
So how about let's talk on outside, North America and more international opportunities. Hunter, obviously, you guys just completed an acquisition of an add-on acquisition for Resonetics in Israel, STI Laser. Stryker's obviously a global player. Chris, you're supplying to those types of customers. How do you guys view kind of international market opportunities, be it in Europe, obviously different regulatory environment over there, or in China with just a massive emerging middle class, certainly is going to represent a big time opportunity in the future.
Yeah, I'm happy to go. We work with a guy named Chip Hance, who's actually involved in this Resonetics investment for us. Chip was a 20, 30-year Abbott guy, most recently built their vascular business over about a decade. Then he went to run a company called Creganna, which was a larger MedTech CMO, sold to TE Connectivity before he joined us. And one of the first things he mentions every time we chat with the company, certainly one based here in North America, is kind of what's the U.S. strategy, and he constantly thinks that folks are under-indexed to the ex-U.S. opportunity. So he pushes folks to try and get there organically. As Karl was saying, with the Resonetics investment, we've done 2 deals, one in Switzerland, one in Israel. Part of it's because for that business, our customer base, who are the OEMs, likes to work with suppliers who have a global footprint, kind of be where they are. And then on the OEM side, I think he's had a lot of success with product launches, outside the U.S. I think the challenge is always just kind of how do you execute that successfully given the various, challenges. But I'd say for folks who have, business here in North America, who are thinking about building them, thinking about potentially selling them down the road, crafting some sort of strategy, giving that some thought, it adds a little bit of growth to the business today, and it just opens up the TAM for the next buyer. So it's a big topic.
I think last year we sold into 19 different countries and 31 different states. So we're truly a global business, even though we're in a very tiny community. I think there's a ton of opportunity across the board. Our biggest issue is finding those and really finding representatives. How do we turn over the rocks and find those opportunities across the globe? And we've added a sales agency in China. We've added a sales agency in Europe, Israel, and then we're across the United States. But there's a ton of opportunity there. It's just we have to find them. That's our toughest thing.
We've been operating under a transatlantic operating model to incorporate some of the things that have been successful in the U.S. outside of the U.S., and that includes just more dedicated sales reps going away from distributor models, so we have more direct customer interaction and case coverage, specific marketing teams and regulatory teams dedicated to individual markets, because it is just drastically different country per country in Europe, versus the U.S. And we've seen a lot of success, but a lot of the same competitors that we're dealing with in the U.S. are the same outside of the U.S. as well. Occasionally, you'll get smaller, niche companies and niche markets within our business in different areas, but for the most part, we're trying to implement a lot of the things that have helped in the U.S. Get us successful.
Great. So the final kind of headline topic we'll discuss, kind of sector drivers of capital inflows and the M&A market conditions within the sector. It's been white hot over the last, in particular the last 5 years, but really over the last decade. As we discussed at the outset, a ton of capital and a ton of consolidation activity. So from, a panelist perspective, what are some of the, for a prospective business owner, right, who's contemplating a potential exit, what are some of the highly valued attributes, for prospective acquisition targets, and kind of describe your evaluation process for those targets?
I'm on the other side. You guys can answer this one.
So for us, it's quality first. So quality of operations, systems, manufacturing, making sure that the business is running the proper way. I mentioned a big risk earlier is the regulatory component. So seeing a medical technology that's been cleared, has some time on the market, has some feedback from the field, helps us avoid those safety, efficacy type of issues with a product. And, ultimately, we want innovative, good products out there. So things that are cutting edge and not me-too products that'll help differentiate us in our market spaces.
Yeah, I don't sit in Kevin's shoes, but, reading a lot of the, management call transcripts and equity, research reports, I think a lot of the OEMs are looking for growth. So, if you've got a business that's growing, 5 to 10, if you can get double-digit growth, I think that's pretty compelling to a lot of the OEMs. I'd say, from our vantage point, as we look at businesses, if I was advising someone selling their business, just keep the story simple. Karl's going to ask you to write a 100-page, deck or whatever. You need, 15 pages probably to tell the story. So keep the story simple. Keep the numbers, synthesized and simple. A lot of the things. Resonetics is a good example. So we had a board meeting a couple months ago, and we're chatting with these guys around kind of the key operating KPIs for their business, not like the 20 things you track, but like the 3 or 5 things that you track that kind of checks the momentum of the business, and just getting a longitudinal view of that stuff. So like in 3, 4, 5 years time, it can just help underpin the story for the next buyer. And you're like, this is what drives our business. These are the stuff we track, and it helps people draw lines into the future. So giving that some thought in advance, I think is pretty helpful. And keeping the next chapter story as structured as possible. Don't try and stray too much from what you've historically achieved, because I think that erodes credibility.
Yeah, speaking from my side, why I think the group that I partnered with really liked our company is it was really simple, really clean, not a lot of excuses. You just make it very easy. And my recommendation for companies that I think why they viewed us the way that they did is we weren't afraid to grow. I mean, a lot of times people get conservative, get complacent, and people want to see an opportunity to grow, and that's what we did. I mean, we moved into a new facility that was, we specifically built it 3 times the size that we were to prepare ourselves for growth, and that was 4 years ago. We're doubling the size right now. So I think those are the kind of stories that the people like to see is it's not the end of the runway. And then on top of it is, everybody wants to do it, but have a diversified customer base. I mean, that to me is probably one of the most important things that you can do is have diversification. So,
Chris, for managers going through a sale process, which is arduous, as everybody I'm sure in the audience knows as well as we do. I mean, what advice would you give to a manager, given you just went through a process? What factors should they prepare for? What advice would you give them?
Have patience. People are going to it's like going through a physical 10 times over. They're going to want a lot of data, a lot of information that you might not view as important, but it's important to them. And just have patience. That's all I can tell you. Trying to think. It's been a couple years now, but be honest. Be honest. It is. Treat it like it's the IRS walking in. I swear to God, you're a lot better off doing it that way than things getting uncovered, because then there becomes a lack of trust and the whole thing falls apart. So, I guess that's my 2 cents.
So for kind of smaller, to mid-sized contract manufacturing organizations, in light of all of the consolidation that is going on, there's going to be fallout, right? It's an extremely fragmented market. As Hunter alluded to earlier, Abbott's out there doing business with 200 to 300 contract manufacturing organizations, but clearly, the OEMs are demanding more, right, from their CMOs, and is there a window for smaller contract manufacturing organizations to exit in the near term, or potentially putting their businesses at risk of losing business as their existing platform sunset to the larger players in the marketplace?
To me, it depends on what your capabilities are. Again, I'm going to look at our company. We're very unique. We don't have a lot of competitors, and so I think that window stays open almost forever. Where you run into trouble is if you've got a number of competitors and it's kind of like musical chairs and the music stops, there's going to be somebody without a chair. And I think some of that's going to happen, but it depends on what your capabilities are. And one of my sayings is if you have a big moat around your business, I think you're safe. If you don't, I don't want to be the last guy standing.
Yeah, I mean, just building on that comment, Chris is fortunate. Most businesses have competition, and for those that do, in a market like today, it ain't going to get any more robust. So, I think you got to seriously consider if you're a smaller to mid-size scale guy, and you're not game to put a bunch of capital in to grow your business organically or do acquisitions to get scale, I would seriously think about, if I had my own business, I would seriously think about selling today, just given where valuations are at and what the future might look like. Because I think Carl's right. I think the OEMs will continue to, I'd say, even more aggressively consolidate their supply chains. And so if you're not going to sell, you gotta get scale pretty quickly, I think.
So last question, when rubber hits the road on value, right? I mean, and it's been an incredibly robust market to sell these assets over the last few years. I mean, do you believe that these types of valuations and multiples will continue? Will they increase? Will there be some shakeout in this industry?
I'm going to say they're going down because I picked the right time to sell. No, I'll let these guys answer that one.
Yeah, I think multiples have kind of peaked. I mean, I think we saw a pretty rapid expansion and continued expansion over the last few years, but at least on our end, we've kind of seen them settle out a bit. I think as much as it is about the multiples, folks' scrutiny of earnings and EBITDA and everything that's kind of going into it that underpins the ultimate purchase price, I think at least around our shop is intensifying. I think there's been kind of the regular way sort of adjustments, and in the last like 12, 18 months, there's been like a whole new flavor of adjustments I've not seen before, and a lot of those. We've been, the victim of it too. You capitalize and they don't come to fruition. So I think multiples are going to be, pulling back here, over the coming years, and I think earnings will, normalize to more historical levels too, just the way the presentation is.
I'd like to thank our panelists for what was hopefully a thoughtful discussion, and we'd love to open it up to any questions in the audience. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a question for Chris. Not that Hunter doesn't seem like a nice guy, but when you're looking, if you are lucky enough or have the opportunity to bring on a private equity investor, we talked a lot about what they're looking at out of you. Can you flip that around and say, what do you look for out of someone in the private equity field to make sure that's an alignment from a partnership standpoint as well?
Absolutely the most important question that could be asked of somebody in my role. And we actually talked about this, why Hunter's smiling. It depends on what your goals and objectives are. If your goal is to leave the business the day that the check is in your bank account, then how you evaluate different offers is one way. In my particular case, I want to work for basically eternity. I mean, not eternity, but until I'm 70 plus years old. And I truly looked at it like a marriage. I mean, I was picking out somebody not based on how big a check they wrote, but it has to be a partner that you can work with. Incredibly important, because most people who are selling businesses are truly entrepreneurs. They're not used to having a boss. And at the end of the day, you don't own 51%, so you have a boss. So you need to make sure that you pick the right organization, or it will be painful. So that's again, we talked about this. That is more important than the size of the check. I'll guarantee you, if you're going to stay and you want to stay with the business, that's number one right there.
So we do a lot of work with family-owned businesses, and I mean, it's absolutely essential as we're running a sale process to scrutinize on the very front end of these processes who is getting a seat at the table, such that we're spending thoughtful time with good prospective buyers, because we're trying to do a number of things in these processes, right? We're trying to maximize value, but I mean, almost as important, and in many cases, it's the most important thing, as Chris said, which is to find the best partner for the long-term stewardship of the business. Other questions from the group?
Quiet group.
That's a It's a snowy night. And the bar looks lonely. So thank you everybody for coming. We appreciate the time, and the bar is now open.